I had always been a light sleeper, the kind of person who would wake up at the slightest creak of the floorboards or the whisper of the wind through the trees outside my window. But that night was different. That night, I woke up because I heard my name. It wasn't loud, not a shout or even a normal voice. It was a whisper, soft, slow, almost gentle. But there was something unnatural about it, something that made my skin prickle with unease. I lay in bed, heart hammering against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. My room was shrouded in darkness, save for the dim glow of the street lamp outside, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I turned my head slightly, listening, wondering if I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. A whisper. My name. Ethan. The sound slithered through the air like a breath carried on the wind, barely above the threshold of hearing. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, surrounding me, filling the silence of the night. My fingers gripped the blanket, pulling it up to my chin like a child seeking comfort. I told myself it was just a trick of my half-asleep mind, that I was dreaming, that I was being ridiculous. But my instincts screamed otherwise. Something about that voice didn't feel human. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my breathing even. If there was someone outside, playing a prank, they would eventually get bored and leave. But as the seconds ticked by, the room remained deathly silent. No sound of footsteps, no rustling of bushes, just the oppressive weight of something unseen lurking in the darkness. Then a tap. Not a knock, but a soft, deliberate tap on my window. My stomach turned to ice. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. The curtains were drawn, but the dim light from outside barely illuminated the thin fabric. There was a shadow standing just beyond it. I couldn't breathe. The shadow wasn't moving, wasn't shifting as a person's would. It stood completely still, as if waiting. Then the whisper came again. Ethan. My body locked up. The whisper didn't come from the window. It came from inside the room. I bolted upright, my hands scrambling for my bedside lamp. My fingers fumbled with the switch, and when the light finally flickered on, the room was empty. The shadow at the window was gone. I sat there, panting, staring at the place where it had stood just moments ago. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, checking the time. 3:12 a.m. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told myself it had been a bad dream. Maybe I had imagined the whisper, the shadow, the tapping. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had called my name in the dead of night, and I had almost answered. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease clinging to me like a second skin. The events of the night before replayed over and over in my mind. The whisper, the shadow at the window, the tapping. It had felt too real to be a dream. I spent the morning in a daze, my movement sluggish, my thoughts clouded with exhaustion. Even the bright sunlight filtering through my bedroom window did little to chase away the lingering dread. By noon, I decided I needed air. Maybe if I got out of the house, I could clear my head and convince myself it had all been in my imagination. I left home and walked down the narrow streets of our quiet little town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where old traditions still lingered like ghosts from another era. As I walked past the small cafe and the old general store, I spotted Mr. Henshaw sitting outside, watching the world with sharp, knowing eyes. Mr. Henshaw was one of the oldest residents of our town, a man whose face was etched with deep lines, like a map of all the years he had lived. People said he knew every story, every legend, every dark secret that lay hidden beneath the town's surface. If there was anyone who might know something about the strange whisper, it was him. I hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Morning, Mr. Henshaw." He lifted his head, his piercing gaze settling on me. "Ethan," he said, his voice rough with age. "You look like hell." I forced a chuckle, rubbing the back of my neck. "Didn't sleep much last night." His expression didn't change. He just kept watching me, as if he already knew why. "Something happened," I admitted. "Something weird." He leaned forward slightly. "Go on." I swallowed hard, then told him everything. The whisper, the tapping at the window, the shadow that had stood there, watching me. As I spoke, his expression darkened. By the time I finished, his knuckles were white where they gripped his cane. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice lower than before, he asked, "Did you answer it?" I shook my head. No, I didn't say a word. His shoulders relaxed, just slightly. "Good," he muttered. "Good." His reaction sent a fresh wave of unease through me. "Mr. Henshaw, what was it?" He sighed heavily and looked out at the street, as if weighing his words. Then he turned back to me, his gaze like iron. "There are things in this world we don't understand, boy. Things that exist in the dark corners of the earth, in the spaces where reality thins. And sometimes they call to us." A chill ran down my spine. "Why?" His eyes darkened. "Because they want you to answer." The words sent a shiver through me. I opened my mouth to ask more, but he continued before I could speak. "There's an old belief," he said, voice hushed. "A rule, passed down through generations. If you ever hear your name whispered in the night, when no one is there, never answer." My stomach twisted. "What happens if you do?" He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. "They take you," he whispered. I felt cold, even in the warmth of the midday sun. "Who?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "No one knows. Some say they were once human, lost souls who answered when they shouldn't have. Others say they've always been here, waiting in the dark for someone foolish enough to speak back." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Has this happened before?" He nodded slowly. "A long time ago. Before your time. Before mine even. There were stories. People who vanished in the middle of the night, their doors still locked, their beds still warm. The only thing left behind was the whisper of their name, lingering in the air. I gripped the edge of the wooden bench I was sitting on. "And no one ever saw them again?" "No," he said grimly. "Not as they were." A cold wind drifted through the street, making me shudder. Mr. Henshaw exhaled deeply and fixed me with a look so serious it made my chest tighten. "Listen to me, boy. If it happens again, if you hear it call your name, you do not speak. You do not move. You do not acknowledge it in any way." I nodded stiffly. "Okay. And don't tell anyone else," he warned. "Not unless you trust them. Talking about it too much, sometimes that's enough to make them notice you." A sense of dread settled in my gut. "Them." He didn't elaborate. I sat there for a while, letting his words sink in, the weight of them pressing against my ribs. The whole thing sounded impossible, like a campfire story meant to scare children. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had heard it. I had felt it. It was real. Finally, I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me. "Thanks, Mr. Henshaw." He nodded but didn't smile. "Be careful, Ethan." I left him there, sitting in his usual spot, staring off into the distance like a man remembering things he wished he could forget. As I walked home, the words played over and over in my mind. "If you ever hear your name whispered in the night, when no one is there, never answer." And then another thought surfaced, one that sent ice down my spine. What if I wasn't the only one hearing it? The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease. No matter what I did, whether I tried watching TV, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, or even blasting music in my earbuds, I couldn't drown out Mr. Henshaw's words. "If you ever hear your name whispered in the night, when no one is there, never answer." By the time night rolled around, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but fear kept my mind sharp. The thought of going to bed, of lying in the dark where the whisper could find me again, made my skin crawl. I considered staying up all night, keeping every light on, but I knew that wasn't realistic. Sooner or later, I'd have to sleep. So I prepared. I double-checked that all the windows were locked. I slid the latch on the front door, then placed a chair against it, just in case. I pulled the curtains tightly shut in my bedroom, blocking out the view of the street lamp. My phone was fully charged and within reach. And most importantly, I told myself over and over, no matter what happens, do not answer. By 1 a.m., my body betrayed me. Fatigue pulled at my limbs, and despite the fear twisting in my stomach, I felt my eyelids growing heavier. I didn't even realize I had fallen asleep until... Tap. 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 My eyes snapped open. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. The room was bathed in the dim glow of my nightlight, but the shadows seemed deeper somehow. Heavier. The kind that didn't belong. Then I heard it. Ethan. A whisper. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was exactly the same as last time. Soft, slow, inhuman. But something was different. It was closer. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body going rigid. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud enough that I worried it would somehow hear me. I stayed perfectly still. I didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. The whisper came again. Ethan. The sound slithered through the room like a phantom wind, curling around me, chilling my skin. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my room. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but lie there and let that thing whisper my name into the dark. But Mr. Henshaw's warning rang through my mind. Do not acknowledge it. Do not answer. I pressed my lips together, fighting the overwhelming urge to panic. My body begged me to move, to bolt out of bed, to turn on the light, to do something. But I forced myself to stay still. A sickening realization struck me then. The voice wasn't just closer. It was right next to my bed. I could feel something in the air beside me, an unnatural presence, a coldness that didn't belong. The whisper came again, softer, more insistent. Ethan. A tear slipped from the corner of my eye. I had never felt terror like this before. Paralyzing, suffocating, absolute. Then, tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed from the window, sharp and deliberate. A part of me hoped, that maybe the sound meant whatever was inside my room had left. Maybe the whisper had retreated back outside. But I didn't dare open my eyes to check. My lungs burned from holding my breath. I slowly exhaled, trying not to make a sound, trying to convince myself that if I stayed perfectly still, I would survive the night. Then, the mattress shifted. My entire body went ice cold. The weight of my blanket pressed down harder, like something was sitting at the edge of my bed. I felt it. It was there. I bit down so hard on my tongue that I tasted blood. My hands clenched into fists beneath the covers, my nails digging into my palms. Ethan. The whisper was so close now that I could feel the breath against my ear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I didn't. I didn't answer. And then, the weight lifted. The presence faded. The air in my room grew warm again, the unnatural chill dissolving as if it had never been there. I stayed in that exact position for what felt like hours, not daring to move. My body was trembling so violently that I thought I might pass out. Eventually, the first hints of dawn crept in through the cracks of my curtains, painting the room in weak, gray light. The moment I was sure the night was over, I bolted out of bed, gasping for breath. I checked the window. Locked. I checked my door. Still latched, the chair unmoved. But I knew something had been here. Something had been in my room. And it had been so close. My phone was still on my nightstand. With shaking hands, I grabbed it and checked the time. 3:33 a.m. The same time as before. I took a shuddering breath and sat on the edge of my bed, my entire body drenched in cold sweat. I hadn't answered. I had followed Mr. Henshaw's warning, but I had made one mistake. I had heard it. And now, I knew it wasn't going to stop. I've barely slept the next night. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected to hear it again. My name, whispered from the darkness, slithering through the air like a living thing. But the whisper never came. That was somehow worse, because I knew it was still out there, waiting, watching. By the time morning arrived, I was running on nothing but exhaustion and nerves. I forced myself to go through the motions, brushing my teeth, getting dressed, pretending that everything was normal, but nothing felt real anymore. I was distracted all through school, unable to focus on anything except the horrible question that had lodged itself in my brain. What would have happened if I had answered? That thought wouldn't leave me alone. I needed answers. So after school, I took a deep breath and walked straight back to Mr. Henshaw's house. The old man answered after the third knock, his face unreadable as he studied me. "You heard it again, didn't you?" I nodded. It was inside my room this time. His expression darkened, but he didn't look surprised. I didn't answer, I added quickly. "I swear." But it felt so close. It even sat on my bed. I could feel it. For a long moment, Mr. Henshaw said nothing. Then he exhaled heavily and stepped aside. "Come in." I hesitated before crossing the threshold, half expecting his house to feel different, like some kind of safe haven against whatever was following me. But it was just a house. Dusty bookshelves, an old clock ticking on the wall, the scent of wood, and something faintly burnt. He led me to a worn-out couch and sat across from me. His fingers drummed against the armrest as he seemed to decide how much to tell me. Finally, he spoke. "You should leave town." The words hit me like a slap. "What?" "This thing, it won't stop. Once it chooses you, it doesn't lose interest. It will whisper your name again, and again, and again, until you answer." I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" Mr. Henshaw gave me a long, unreadable look. Then he simply said, "It will make you." My stomach turned. I wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that I could resist it. But the memory of last night, the weight on my bed, the breath against my ear, sent a shiver down my spine. "It can't physically hurt me, right?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Henshaw didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked over to a cabinet. He rummaged inside before pulling out something small and worn. A photograph. He handed it to me. I stared at the faded picture, confused. It showed a teenage boy, maybe 17 or 18, standing on a front porch. He had messy dark hair, a half smile on his face. He looked normal, but the date on the photograph was from 30 years ago. I frowned. "Who is this?" Mr. Henshaw's voice was grave. "My son." The word sent an eerie chill through me. I looked at the photograph again, my stomach twisting. What happened to him? Mr. Henshaw didn't answer. He just took the picture back, staring at it for a long time before placing it face down on the table. "I moved here when he was just a boy," he finally said. "Thought it would be a fresh start. Thought we'd be safe." I swallowed. Safe from what? His eyes met mine, sharp and haunted. From the whisper. A cold, sick feeling crawled up my spine. "He heard it too?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Mr. Henshaw nodded. He was stubborn. Thought I was just telling him old stories to scare him. He ignored my warnings. "One night," he answered. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I forced myself to ask, and then? Mr. Henshaw's hands clenched into fists. I never saw him again. A shudder ran through me. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? All this time, I thought the whisper was just some kind of entity, some ghostly presence that wanted attention. But this was something else. Something worse. It took people. And once they were gone, they never came back. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "I have to go home," I said suddenly, standing up so fast that my vision swam. Mr. Henshaw's expression was grim. "Ethan, listen to me. If you don't leave town, it will keep coming back. You've already heard it twice. The third time, he hesitated. That's when people start making mistakes." I didn't want to hear anymore. I muttered a quick thank you and practically ran out of his house, my pulse pounding in my ears. I walked home faster than I ever had before, every shadow stretching too long, every gust of wind sounding like a whisper. By the time I reached my front door, my hands were shaking. I fumbled with the key, desperate to get inside. That's when I felt it. A presence. I froze, my back stiffening. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head. At the end of my street, standing just beyond the glow of the flickering streetlight, was a shadow. It wasn't moving. It wasn't walking. It was just standing there, watching me. A nauseating wave of fear crashed over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't know if it was the same thing that whispered my name, but I wasn't about to find out. I wrenched the door open, rushed inside, and slammed it shut behind me. Then silence. I stood there, heart racing, waiting, listening. But no whisper came. Not yet. My breath shuddered out of me. I knew one thing for certain. The whisper had followed me, and next time it wouldn't stay outside. That night, the air inside my house felt wrong. It was too still, too quiet, like the entire world was holding its breath. Even the usual nighttime noises, the distant hum of passing cars, the rustling of trees outside my window, were gone. I locked every door, every window. I checked twice, 3 times. It didn't matter, because I could feel it. Something was inside. I turned off all the lights and sat in the middle of my bed, knees pulled up to my chest. My phone was in my hand, but I didn't dare turn on the screen. If I made a sound, if I moved too suddenly, I knew that I would hear it again. The whisper. The last time, it had been on my bed, touching me. My skin crawled at the memory. I gripped my phone tighter, debating whether to call someone, anyone, but what would I even say? Hey, I think something invisible is whispering my name at night, and I'm scared it's going to take me. Yeah, that would go over well. No one would believe me. Not unless they heard it for themselves. Creak. I sucked in a sharp breath. The sound had come from the hallway, right outside my door. I held my breath, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to believe it was just the house settling, wood shifting, pipes groaning, but no. This was footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I swallowed, gripping the sheets with white-knuckled fingers. My mind screamed at me to do something. Hide, run, scream. But I couldn't move. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. Then, knock, knock, knock. My stomach dropped. Someone was knocking on my door. No, not someone. A voice followed. A whisper, low, drawn out, sickly sweet. Ethan. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, pressing my lips together to keep from making a sound. Ethan, open the door. It was right there. My door wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. I wasn't going to open it. I curled tighter into myself, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to cover my ears, but I was too afraid to move. Then, the handle turned. I watched in horror as it twisted slowly, like someone was testing it. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The whisper came again, softer this time. Come on, Ethan. I know you can hear me. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even acknowledge it. I just had to wait. Eventually, it would go away, wouldn't it? But then, knock, knock, knock. Harder this time. Louder. Let me in. Terror clawed up my throat. I wanted to run. But where? Even if I made it to the front door, even if I somehow got outside, where would I go? Ethan. I could hear the smile in its voice. Mocking. Patient. It knew I wouldn't answer. It was waiting for me to slip up. To say something. To give in. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Fine, it whispered. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door creaked open. My body locked up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream so badly, but I didn't. I couldn't. The door swung inward, slow and deliberate, revealing the pitch-black hallway beyond. Nothing was there. Or was it? The darkness felt thicker, heavier, like something was standing just out of sight, watching me. I gripped my sheets, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The air in my room felt suffocating, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. Then I heard it. A soft, raspy breath. Inside my room. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body trembling. It was in here with me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The whisper came again, right beside my ear. Ethan. I nearly screamed, but I bit down on my tongue, forcing myself to stay silent. Don't answer. Don't acknowledge it. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, the breathing stopped, and so did the whisper. I kept my eyes shut. I didn't move. I sat there in the silence, waiting. Click. My door swung shut. I cracked my eyes open. The room was empty. The whisper was gone. I let out a shaky breath. my entire body going limp. I felt like I had been holding myself together with nothing but sheer willpower, and now that it was over, I was ready to collapse. It was over. But I knew the truth. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting. Waiting for me to answer. Waiting for me to break. And next time, I wasn't sure if I'd be strong enough to resist. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. Who would believe me? Who would believe that something unseen had crept into my room, whispering my name in the dead of night? That the door had opened on its own? That I had felt it breathing next to me? I barely believed it myself. But I wasn't the only one being haunted by the whispers. Someone else had heard them too. Someone close to me. And unlike me, he answered. It started the next evening. I was sitting in the back of the school library, my head resting against my arms, trying to force away the exhaustion gnawing at me. I hadn't slept. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected to hear it again. The whisper. The knock at my door. The thing I couldn't see standing in my room. I was so tired. That's when someone slammed a book onto the table next to me. I jolted upright, my heart hammering. Dude, you look like hell. I blinked blearily at the person sitting across from me. James, my best friend since middle school. I exhaled, rubbing my face. No kidding. James leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. His expression was somewhere between amused and concerned. What's up? He asked. Insomnia, or just failing to keep a normal sleep schedule? I hesitated. I wanted to tell him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just mumbled, yeah. Something like that. James smirked. You should really cut back on the late-night horror movies. I forced a laugh. If only it were that simple. Then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. I swear I thought about texting you last night. The weirdest thing happened. My pulse spiked. James leaned back, stretching. I was lying in bed, right? About to fall asleep. And then, I swear I heard someone whisper my name. I felt sick. My stomach plummeted. What did it sound like? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James raised an eyebrow. Like someone was standing right outside my door, calling for me. I swallowed, my hands trembling under the table. What did you do? James grinned. What do you think? I answered. A cold dread coiled in my chest. I stared at him. He had answered. He had answered. My breath caught in my throat. What did it say back? I asked, my voice hoarse. James frowned slightly, as if trying to remember. Nothing. Just silence. I even got up to check the hallway. Thought maybe my mom was messing with me or something. But no one was there. Of course no one was there. It wasn't a person. It was something else. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my skin. James, I said carefully, if you ever hear it again, don't answer. No matter what. Don't even acknowledge it. James chuckled, shaking his head. Dude, relax. It was probably just my imagination. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. But I didn't press further. Because what if I was wrong? What if it really had been his imagination? What if I was just letting paranoia get to me? I tried to tell myself that. I wanted to believe it. But that night, James disappeared. It happened sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly. No sound, no reason, just that gut-wrenching primal feeling that something was wrong. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands clammy with sweat. A message from James. 2:14 a.m. Bro. I hear it again. I sat up fast, my stomach twisting into knots. I scrolled down. Another message. 2:16 a.m. It keeps saying my name. Outside my window this time. Cold panic surged through me. My fingers flew over the keyboard. Me. Do not answer. I'm serious, James. I waited. No response. I called him. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I jumped out of bed, throwing on a hoodie. My hands shook as I grabbed my car keys and sprinted downstairs. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I didn't care if I woke up my parents. James' house was only a few streets away. I could be there in 5 minutes. As I sped through the empty streets, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I knew something had happened. I knew it had him. By the time I pulled into James' driveway, my hands were slick with sweat. The house was dark. Too dark. I jumped out of the car, running up to his front door. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. James. Silence. I grabbed the handle and twisted. Unlocked. I stepped inside. The house was cold. Not normal cold. Wrong cold. A bone-deep chill that settled into my skin like ice. I moved carefully through the hallway, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. James. I whispered. Still nothing. Then I saw it. His bedroom door, wide open. My heart pounded. I stepped inside. The bed was empty. The sheets were torn away, lying crumpled on the floor. The window was open. The curtains fluttered in the wind. And on the windowsill, black handprints. Not dirt. Not paint. Something else. Something darker. Something wrong. I knew what had happened. James had answered. James was gone. And I was next. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My limbs were heavy, my eyes burned, and my mind was fogged with exhaustion. The whisper had left me shaken, but worse than that, I knew it wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before it came back. But something happened that day, something worse. I spent most of the morning in a daze, trying to act normal at school. My best friend, Jason, noticed immediately. Dude, you look like hell, he said as we walked toward the cafeteria. You sick or something? I hesitated. Jason had been my best friend since middle school, and if anyone would listen to me without thinking I was crazy, it was him. I didn't sleep much, I admitted. Jason raised an eyebrow. Nightmares. I hesitated again. My mind screamed at me not to say it, to keep quiet, but the fear, the sheer terror of last night, was too much to hold in. I heard something, I whispered. Jason frowned. Heard what? I licked my lips, my throat dry. A voice. Jason scoffed. Bro, you probably just dreamt it. No, I said quickly. It was real. It whispered my name. Jason's smirk faded slightly, replaced by something else, unease. What did it sound like? He asked, his voice lower now. Like, I swallowed. Like it was standing right next to me. But I couldn't see it. Jason was quiet for a moment, then let out a forced chuckle. Creepy, man. But it's probably just your brain playing tricks on you. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew better. That night, Jason texted me. Jason, bro, I think you got in my head with that whisper stuff. I swear I heard something weird in my room just now. My stomach dropped. Me, what did you hear? It took him a minute to reply. Jason, someone whispering my name. But when I turned the lights on, nothing was there. A cold chill ran down my spine. No, not him too. Me, don't answer it. Whatever you do, don't respond to it. Jason, chill, dude. I didn't say anything back. It's probably just my mind playing tricks on me. I wanted to believe that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the whisper had moved on to him. The next morning, Jason didn't show up to school. At first, I assumed he was sick. Maybe he stayed up too late, freaked himself out, and just decided to skip. But when I texted him, I got no reply. By lunchtime, I was getting nervous. Me, dude, where are you? No response. I called him. No answer. That gnawing dread in my stomach grew worse. After school, I rode my bike straight to his house. I had been there a million times before. His parents knew me. I had practically lived there over the summers. I knocked on the door. Jason's mom answered. Oh, Ethan, she said with a tired smile. Jason's not here. My stomach twisted. Not here. I repeated. Where is he? Her brow furrowed slightly. I thought he was with you. A cold weight settled in my chest. No, I said slowly. I haven't seen him since yesterday. Her smile faded completely now. That's strange, she murmured, glancing toward the stairs. He was in his room last night. I assumed he left early for school. I felt sick. Jason never just left without telling someone. I tried to keep my voice steady. Can I check his room? His mom hesitated, but then nodded. Sure. Just let me know if you see anything strange. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. I stepped inside and made my way up the familiar stairs. Jason's room was at the end of the hall. I opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy, like the walls themselves were pressing inward. The curtains were drawn, leaving the room dim, but I could see enough to know that Jason hadn't left on his own. His bed was unmade, sheets twisted like he had been thrashing in his sleep. His phone was still on the nightstand, screen cracked like it had been dropped. But the worst part? The closet door was wide open. Jason hated sleeping with the closet open. He always made a joke about how monsters live in there. I stared at it, my mouth dry. I didn't want to step closer, but I had to. I inched forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath my weight. The inside of the closet was mostly empty, just some clothes hanging, a pile of shoes, a few storage bins. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the closet, on the wooden paneling of the back wall, were deep scratch marks, for long, jagged lines, like fingernails clawing at the wood. My stomach twisted. I reached out with trembling fingers, running them over the marks. The wood was splintered fresh. Jason had been in here. He had tried to hold on, but something took him. Jason never came back. His parents filed a missing persons report. Flyers were made. The police asked me questions when I had last seen him, what we talked about. I didn't tell them the truth. Because what could I say? A whisper called his name, and now he's gone. No one would believe me. But I knew. I knew that whatever had whispered my name had whispered his next. And he had answered. Now he was gone. And I was next. Jason was gone. The weight of those words crushed me every time I thought about them. The police were still looking for him. His parents were desperate for answers, and his face was plastered on flyers across town. But I knew the truth. I knew he wasn't coming back. Because I had seen the claw marks in his closet. I had felt the presence in my room at night. And I had heard the whispers. The thing that took him, it was still here. And it was waiting for me. The first night after Jason's disappearance, I barely slept. I lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe if I left town, it would stop. Maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. But deep down, I knew better. There was no escaping this. When the whisper finally came, it was different. I heard my name, soft, delicate, almost gentle. Ethan. A chill crawled down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay still, to stay silent. Ethan. It was closer now. I clutched my blanket, my body rigid. Ethan, why won't you answer me? My breath hitched. It had never spoken like that before. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and my mind screamed for me to stay quiet, to never answer. But then, a knock at my window. I froze. My bedroom was on the second floor. No one should be able to reach my window. Slowly, against every instinct in my body, I turned my head, and I saw it. A dark figure stood outside my window, barely visible against the night sky. It had no face, just a shadow where one should be. Its long fingers rested against the glass, tapping lightly. But what made my blood run cold? It had Jason's hoodie. My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, run, hide, anything but this. Then, don't you miss your friend? The whisper was inside my head now, slithering like a parasite burrowing deep into my thoughts. Just say something. Just one word. No, I wouldn't do it. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to look away. But then, the window latch clicked. My breath stopped. I had locked my window. I knew I had. But somehow, it was unlocking itself. I scrambled back against the wall, terror gripping every inch of my body. The latch slid free. The window creaked open. Cold air rushed into the room, and with it, the whisper. Come outside, Ethan. I shook my head violently, pressing my hands over my ears. No. But then the whisper changed. It wasn't Jason's voice anymore. It was my mother's. "Ethan, honey, it's okay. Come here." Tears welled in my eyes. No, it wasn't real. "Come to me, baby. I'm right here." My hands trembled. My breathing was uneven, ragged. I knew it wasn't my mother. I knew it wasn't. But my body wasn't listening. Because the thing outside wasn't just whispering anymore. It was stepping into my room. The air turned freezing cold. The lights flickered. My breath came out in visible puffs. The shadow loomed over me, stretching unnaturally, its faceless head tilting. "Ethan." Something inside me snapped. Before I could stop myself, before I could even think, I whispered back, "What do you want?" The room collapsed into darkness. A force ripped through me, cold hands grasping, pulling, dragging. My body was weightless, spinning, falling, sinking into something deep and endless. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my limbs weren't mine anymore. I had done the one thing I swore I would never do. I answered. And now, I was paying the price. The light flickered in the distance, weak at first but growing stronger, a beacon in the abyss. The thing behind me hesitated. I could feel its grip loosen just slightly, its presence wavering. Whatever was calling it, it didn't like it. The voices in the void shifted. They weren't whispering my name anymore. They were whispering its name, a name I couldn't understand. The sound of it made my skin crawl, like something ancient and wrong, a word that shouldn't exist. But the moment it was spoken, the thing that had been pulling me into the void screamed. Not a human scream, not an animal's. Something older, something monstrous. The world shook. The shadows twisted and convulsed as the darkness around me began to crack. I could see flashes of something beyond, light motion my room home. I wasn't dead. Not yet. But I was changing. I could feel it in my bones, in my thoughts. The void had seeped into me, wrapping itself around my soul. I had answered the whisper, and the curse was already taking hold. I wouldn't leave this place the same, if I left at all. Jason was still there, his hollow eyes locked onto me. His lips moved, whispering words that didn't reach my ears. I felt my body being pulled away, the light dragging me back toward the world I had known. But Jason, he wasn't coming with me. He was stuck here, with them, with it. For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw everything. His pain, his regret, his fear, the truth. Jason hadn't been the first, and I wouldn't be the last. The curse wasn't just about answering. It was about replacing. One person gets out, another stays behind. That was the price. The whispers were a trap, a cycle that had been repeating for centuries. And now, I was part of it. I gasped as I sat up in bed, drenched in cold sweat, my lungs burning like I had been drowning. The warmth of my room surrounded me, the familiar walls, the moonlight streaming through my window. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream, until I heard it. Not the whisper, the silence. Jason's house was just across the street, but his window was empty. The police would never find him. His parents would never know what happened. But I did. I had survived, at his expense, and deep inside, beneath my skin, I could still feel it. The void. It hadn't let go of me completely. I was different now. And soon, I would start whispering too. Days passed. Then weeks. Jason's disappearance became just another mystery in a town full of unsolved tragedies. His parents never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, but deep down, I knew hope was useless. Because Jason was gone. Not dead. Not missing. Gone. And part of me was too. At first, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I went to school. I answered questions about Jason with well-practiced lies. I even forced myself to smile when people asked if I was okay. But I wasn't. I could still hear it. Not the whisper. The silence. At night, my house felt different. The air was heavier, colder. I avoided my reflection because sometimes, just for a second, I saw something else looking back. Something empty. Something waiting. And worst of all, I wasn't alone anymore. Because Jason was still here. Not the Jason I knew. Not the one who used to joke around in class, who could never sit still, who always had something stupid to say. This Jason didn't speak. He only whispered. The first time I heard him, I nearly screamed. I had been lying in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like I always did these days. And then, Ethan. I shot upright, my breath frozen in my lungs. It was his voice, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the room. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I wanted to tell myself I had imagined it, that my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. But then from the shadows in the corner, Ethan, you let me go. My blood ran cold. I turned my head slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to run. And there he was, Jason, or what was left of him. He was standing in the dark, his form flickering, shifting, like a bad signal struggling to come through. His hoodie was torn, his skin too pale. His eyes were nothing but deep, hollow pits, and his mouth, it never stopped moving, whispering. I wanted to run, but I couldn't, because something inside me understood. I had taken his place in the real world, and now he was trying to take mine. The whispers grew louder every night. Not just Jason's, others. Hundreds of voices, murmuring in the dark, calling my name. I stopped sleeping. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped living, because the truth was sinking in. I had made a mistake that night. Not when I answered the whisper. Not even when I let Jason disappear. No, the mistake was thinking I had escaped. I hadn't, because the cycle never ended. And now it was my turn to whisper. That night, I stood by my window. The town was quiet, bathed in the glow of streetlights. The world still moving like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. I took a deep breath. And then, I whispered, "Can you hear me?" Across the street, in the dimly lit window of another house, a boy turned his head. His eyes widened. His breath caught. And I knew. He had heard me. The cycle would continue. And soon he would belong to the whispers too.